Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to start with the next talk. It's a conversation between the dancer and choreographer Trajal Harrell and the scientist Sebastian Jessberger. My name is Daniel Baumann. I'm the director and curator of Kunsthalle Zurich, and I have worked with Trajal on a project 2 years ago. And I have always been fascinated by other fields of thinking. That's why I'm very happy that Sebastian agreed to be here. I'm going to do a little, very short introduction of the two speakers. Then they each present their activities, and then we move over into the conversation. This should take about 40 minutes if it rolls. And then we would open it for a few questions to the public. So, thank you for joining us today. Thanks to everyone involved, technicians, organizations, Choreographic, and to make this talk possible. Sebastian studied medicine in Hamburg. And he worked in different places, such as La Charité in Berlin, the Max Delbrück Center, or in the Salk Institute in La Jolla in the USA, before he then becoming working at the UZH Zurich. Since 2012, he's the professor of neuroscience at the Institute for Brain Research at the University of Zurich, and he has received numerous prizes and grants throughout all these years. Trajal Harrell is an American choreographer living in Zurich and Athens, and we're very proud that he lives in Zurich, and obviously we're also very proud that you live in Zurich. He was one of the in-house directors at Schauspielhaus, as you may know. And as a choreographer, he gained global recognition with his series of works, 20 Looks of Paris is Burning at the Judson Church. And in 2018, he was named Dancer of the Year. And so that somehow established him as a dancer as well, maybe almost to your own surprise back then. In 22, we presented 3 works in collaboration with Schauspielhaus. The 3 projects were Dancer of the Year from 2018, Deathbed, a world premiere, and Dancer of the Year Shop 4. We will run a few images, but I would like to start with Trajal, and I asked him to shortly introduce his practice. Not everybody knows who he's doing, but I asked him to go through some of the languages and themes that he developed since the end of the 90s. Maybe we should ask my friend Hans-Ulrich Obrist always says, let's give them a big round of applause.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here. I'm glad to talk with you today, Sebastian. I guess I will say I started when I realized that I wanted to choreograph. I was very naive, and I knew I was in my 20s, and I had not come in dance. I'd kind of been a gymnast and had done theater and had studied cultural studies at Yale University, and I knew I was behind physically, let's say, and I knew I had to have a plan to catch up very quickly because dance is a very specific discipline, and how do you, if you haven't been doing, and some people, and there were some people who think that you have to do it all your life in order, you had to start at a very early age. So I didn't have that path, so I knew I had to have very smart shortcuts. And I realized, I think the first thing that became a part of my understanding and theoretical practice was this idea of postmodern dance, that the postmodern dance, that every movement could be dance, that anything sitting, standing, walking could be dance. So that was the first big thing that said, okay, if that's true, then you can be a dancer, of course, if anything can be dance. Then the second thing that was a very big thing is someone invited me to my first voguing ball, and I went there and I was like, oh my goodness, this is like really where postmodern dance is. And I began to understand that that they were taking fashion movement and fashion poses and turning it into dance. Although it was a very complicated kind of competition, the basic operation was turning fashion movement into dance. So I kind of took these two theoretical poles of early postmodern dance and the operation of turning fashion movement into dance, and I made a little solo, and it was a big success to my surprise. I did it as a fuck you piece because I thought nobody would understand it, and I realized that I had hit something, so I decided to just, because I realized that the key really was how do you make a dance? Like, no one can really tell you how to make a dance. They can give you certain clues or certain tools or certain strategies, but it's like, that's the whole point, is that we're always trying to derive new ways of making the paintings or whatever it is. Like, that's the whole point, is to forget about the old ways, perhaps in new ways, or transfer the old ways into new forms. And I just realized that that the key was how do you produce new meanings? Like, how does it dance? And that's very difficult because, unlike verbal language, there's no agreed upon meanings for physical language sometimes. I mean, of course, if you hit someone, we know generally what that means, but not necessarily. So dance has this kind of obscurity. Like, so how do you produce meaning for people in a dance who are sitting in front of it? So I began to propose these kind of imaginary questions, and the first one was, what would have happened in 1963 if someone from the voguing dance tradition had come downtown to Judson Church to perform alongside the early postmoderns? So actually, looking back on it, it was a great idea because it gave a way for everyone to start on the same page. And I made a series of pieces, 8 pieces based on this, and this is kind of was the first period of my work. And then I realized that there was this kind of fashion layer, and I wanted to kind of like flip it over somehow. And so that's when I began to look at butoh dance, which was a lot about death and decay and weakness and trying to give space to people, representation to people who are outside of society. And then I began to look at early modern dance, which was about kind of the super expressivity of emotion. And so I did not, and I think this is very important to my practice, I did not take voguing movements or butoh movements and sew them together. No, but I looked at the operation, what does it mean to turn, what does it mean to have emotion, like, on the stage? Like, how do you produce emotion on the stage? So we would practice, like, one piece I did in 2000, just to give an example later, in 2008, 19 or 18, where we cry from beginning to end. Like, we start crying and we don't, for an hour and a half, we cry nonstop. And this was when I was doing, it was super taboo in dance. Like, you did not do emotion. So I was taking these different operations and trying to figure out how I could eventually, if they would synthesize into another kind of style of movement. And this kind of happened in 2020 with a piece called Cone Concert, where I felt confident enough to that there was a style of movement that had been born from these various operations, but was a synthesis of itself. It was a kind of way of moving, a way of moving through space, or a kind of way of undulating or performing the body that I felt was quite unique to me. And I was ready to share that with other dancers and see what they would do with it. And so I began to try to find language to explain what I was doing. And and that became, many of you may have seen that piece that we've been doing a lot in Zurich since 2020 called the Cone Concert. And I wanted, very important to my practice was this idea that I did not want to make replicates of me. I didn't want this kind of Mickey Mousing. I wanted a style to be a a conversation that we shared, but that would make them more themselves, not more like me necessarily. So I think that was successful in Calm Concert. I do think it's successful, and that's why I think the piece is quite successful in being shown a lot of different places. And that was kind of it. That's kind of where I am. Like, I had these 2 periods of my work, and now I've been doing a lot of work, as I said, on death rituals, and I feel it's very important work, because one of the things I feel very dedicated to that came out of this second period of work was that I really fostered and the idea that dance could be about weakness, because dance traditionally had been a lot about strength. Is that you go see these ballet dancers, you see them balancing, and they make this effortless, but you can see how difficult it is. But we really work on like how the difficulty of showing weakness. And what does it mean when you're weak, and how do you give representation to weakness? So that was the main thing that came out of this second period, and now I want to end it, and I'm thinking about like now this what I don't know will be my last period, but certainly the third part of the third period of my work. What I will do, I want to do something else. I'm ready to make a change. So hopefully you'll see that is starting in 2026, let's say. That's it.
Slide. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Trajal. Super interesting. So I do something quite different. So what my group or what my science is about is trying to understand how the brain is built and how we use it, and actually how it changes when we experience something, and be it dancing or looking at a dance. I mean, that's not the topic, but that's maybe one of the reasons why I'm here. And you know, our brain is really ridiculously complex. So just if you would put all the connections in your brain together, you could go to the moon, and you could go also halfway back, and there's all that stuff within your brain. And there's lots of new connections which are made between neurons, and others are lost. And really the most extreme example of how you change your brain depending on what you experience is that, really in contrast to a dogma which was there for hundreds of years, we have stem cells also in the brain, really similar to in the skin and in the liver and in the blood system. There's also stem cells in the brain, and they're not everywhere, but they're kind of in one specific area. And that area is called the hippocampus. And what the hippocampus is doing, it's very simple. It basically decides, it's like a filter station, what do you remember and what do you forget again. So if you don't have an hippocampus, you will see a piece from Trajal, and you will see the same piece a week later, and it will be completely novel. So your hippocampus is important, that you can bring those experiences into long-term memory storage. And within that area, there are stem cells, and they continuously produce new neurons, and they do that in a way that they respond depending on what you experience or what you learn. And that is what we're really interested in, because kind of those neurons, they are important for learning and memory. And at the same time, there's quite an association or correlation that they are changed in certain diseases, like, for example, major depression, but also in kind of degenerative diseases. So kind of one of the things we really want to understand is how do these stem cells make it, right? How do they form those neurons within the brain? You can see on the left side, like a stem cell, this is how they look like. And then they make neurons, which are on the right side. And we really want to understand how that works, and then also kind of which are the signals and genes that tell the stem cell, or now you have to do something, or now you have to differentiate into something, or you better remain silent. So which genes and pathways and proteins and enzymes are important for that. And I will show you one example how we try to move things we identify in the cell culture, kind of how we can move that to understand how that works also in the human brain. So really one thing which was really important for my lab was looking at this process, and that's like a very superficial way of trying to understand biology, or the brain is just looking at it. But just want to show you one movie. What you see here are two stem cells, one on the bottom right, one on the top left, and you will see kind of, so this is within the mouse brain, which is a model that we use to understand how the human brain works. And you can see the one cell divided, then the other one said, well, I can also do it. And now we can use very special fancy microscopes and very special lasers now to follow over a month kind of how those neurons then integrate into the circuit, and then also how they will eventually change the function of our brain. So that's one thing, but the other thing is really to also understand it not only on a descriptive or superficial visual level, but really to understand, what genes, which pathways are important for that. And I just want to show you one example, kind of where we try to transfer findings we have in the rodent, mostly in the mouse, in the lab mouse, to the human brain. And that has really changed over the last 10 years with the use of so-called mini brains or organoids. And what you do there is kind of that you take an human embryonic stem cell or an induced pluripotent stem cell, but it's a cell that can build all of the body, and you instruct it to become brain. And you really just have to push it once to do something like a brain. I'll show you in a second how it looks like. And then those cells will do all the rest. So they're really self-instructive. It's actually pretty amazing. So once you push them, they will do it. And we grow them in those little micro spinners. It's kind of, they're standing in an incubator. And then you end up with something, which is called a mini brain. It's not very scientific, but they're organoids. You can see here many of those mini brains. You can see they are indeed mini, because what is in the middle of it is a mouse brain, which is also mini compared to our brains. But it really is a fantastic tool to try to understand, if things we identify in the very basic science, if they also play a role in the kind of developing human brain. And this is just one example where a finding we had in the mouse. Then we or others found that this one is important for a certain type of intellectual disability, of a neurodevelopmental disease. And then we could use these mini brains kind of to really identify that those changes in stem cells are important for that. So really one key aspect is kind of that the number of those new neurons is not static but very dynamically regulated. So if you do something, if you do, for example, physical exercise, if you do, if mice live together in a huge cage, if they interact, if they have certain diet, it changes the number of those neurons. But one key thing, which is also very important, kind of unfortunately, is kind of that aging is a dramatic down regulator. So it's a negative regulator of this process. And overall, kind of, I'm super interested now, and maybe it comes with individual aging, how do we age? And obviously kind of, people can age at a different speed depending on the person, right? But what is a very novel concept, or is kind of that also within tissues, some cells are old and some cells are young. So we don't really know kind of, time is obviously important for aging, but there's also this, the idea of kind of biological age or cellular fitness. And there we don't know if that goes linearly or if you're kind of constant for quite some time and then you get really old. But that's a new concept, and it seems to be the case, and there's certain tools that we can look at that. And we also did actually quite some years ago, but we still work on that, is kind of trying to understand if a stem cell is dividing, who gets what type of age. And the daughter cells don't have the same biological age, right? They have the same kind of chronological age, but their biological age is kind of distinct. And one thing we do right now really quite a lot is try to follow that within tissues, kind of to really, to use certain fluorescent, it's like a color-based markers, to see who is old, who is young, and then trying to understand, and this is just one example how we try to do it. It's very fancy genetics, I also don't really understand them, but so with the idea kind of that we can see young cells and old cells in a tissue, be it an organoid or be it in the mouse, which have the same chronological age, but their impact on their biological age is distinct, okay? So that's in principle kind of what we are interested in, is really kind of trying to, how our brain responds to experiences, how these stem cells, and that's a very dramatic way of responding and making a new cell, and then also how these new cells kind of then will kind of ultimately affect brain's behavior. So kind of, that is kind of, so to say, the key question, and the good thing is kind of at some point you don't have to do the work, but all these people do the work, and they also have most of the time the ideas, and if you pay taxes in Switzerland or Europe, I thank you for funding all that, and I hope you get a little bit of an overview of what we try to do. Thank you. All right, Josh, maybe I can ask you a question, and that is kind of in the end. You said you want to, if I understood it correctly, almost give kind of space for dancers, kind of not to become like you, or not doing your idea of dance, but doing their idea of dance, right? So kind of in that conceptual framework, I wonder, then obviously there has to be something shared among a group of dancers, which makes it interesting for them, but also kind of it's not in an empty space. Obviously, then also people have to understand what they do right now, right? So is that kind of, is there some sort of like a very innate kind of feeling that the people have to get, or does it only you would think that works with many dancers, or there has to be some sort of a shared idea of how to do that?
Yeah, I think it's shared, because I mean, when I mean, speaking about that particular moment, because it took me, let's say, that was 2020, and let's say I started in 1999. It took me 21 years to get to the place where I felt even I could share what I thought a dancing body could do with other dancers. So there's a specific group of people at that moment that I feel that I can do that with, and that's just because we've done enough projects that I feel like, okay, now I can walk in the room and say, okay, I am a dancer, which took a long time for me to say, I think, and then to feel that my dancing body had something that could be nurtured by other people, and that other people could take it and expand upon it, you know. But I don't think it can be done with anyone. No. I think it was very specific to those group of people, and we worked together, and we had already had a basis. There was already some, let's say, linguistic and grammatical agreements, because we've performed together, we've traveled around the world together, we've spent time on the stage together, we failed together. So there's, you know, it is like being in a lab, you know what I mean? Like, you've done certain experiments together, and here you have this new big experiment. You're not gonna just call in 10 new lab technicians that you've never worked with before, you know? So it's a bit like that. I mean, maybe you would, I don't know.
Sometimes.
Yeah. No, I'm a bit too scared for that. But yeah, so I don't, but I do think that, because people often ask me about the dancers, and I do think I work with some of the best dancers in the world. Like, they're not, like, they're people like who've gone to really, you know, some of them have spent their lives doing it. Some of them have, you know, they've gone to very prestigious schools and studied it. They, you know, they're really, they're top notch in their field. So they're able to synthesize maybe something that I bring into the rehearsal room or into the studio in a way that, let's say, another set of dancers would not be able to do, because they don't have the background, they don't have the skill sets, you know. It's very funny, because one of the dancer who's most well known for being like the Trajal Harrell dancer is a guy named Thibaut Lac. And Thibaut is very interesting because he was an architect. He studied architecture. And then he went to Parts in Brussels, to the School of Anne Therese de Keersmacher, and they wanted to kick him out because they thought he was the bad dancer. And it's very interesting, because I was also the bad dancer. You know, I was in New York. I was the bad dancer. So so I've just begun to understand that there's something about, and now everyone thinks Thibaut is this. You know, I don't know. Do you all know him? I mean, he's a tall guy. He's a very beautiful dancer, and he's known around the world for being this amazingly beautiful dancer. And it's interesting how the bad dancers get together. You know, and I wonder, is that like something like bad sales?
I hope it's different. I hope it's different for the people working my lab, because kind of, as you said, you're always unsure when you're a dancer. I'm still unsure if I'm a scientist or if not,
really?
Rather a medical doctor or something like that.
You have this too, where you're unsure if you're a scientist.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, it's kind of Well, but that's why it's great to have great scientists working together in the team, because kind of that makes me a little bit more sure that I may be also part of that. I have to say, yeah. But then when you work, so do you have, or it's more just my questions I'm asking now because I'm interested about it. But so is it more like, is it a process where you at some point say, wow, that's it, or is it like that it always gets a little bit closer to you know, enabling, you know, the group of people doing something, you know, novel, and it seems to me kind of, at least, yeah, that in parts it's kind of disruptive compared to classic dance. But is it like, do you have these moments where your brand says that's it, or is it more like a gradual process where you reach at some point what you would have hoped for?
You mean when you're making a piece? Or
yeah,
you're making
when you
yeah, of course. I mean, I think that's what I mean. Like to do what I do, maybe similar to you, you have to zone in very quickly. Not quickly, it doesn't happen quickly, but you have to zone into a very specific point of view and a perspective. And my perspective is that dance, there is a difference between the dance and dancing. And therefore, I think you can take a set of movements, like hand here, hand there, hand here, hand there, but that's not necessarily going to produce meaning and something important. But so for me, dancing is what do you invest in that? Like like I believe there has to be some sort of investment, and so that's the conversation that we have is how do we define the investment? What is it that we're investing in the movement? What is it that we want to share? What is it that we desperately want to and it's not like we have answers, but the fact that we're constantly churning through those questions, that's what makes us a group. That we share, and that's what makes our dancing, because our dancing is coming out of this questioning, this questioning of like how to move, how to invest in that. Sometimes it's just, you see me, I'm just doing that, but somehow or another, I say, if I put this piece of music with it, and I put this costume on and this light, and if she's standing over there, and I understand something, then I begin to cry. It's just like that. And I don't know why it happens. And I tell you, I don't try to figure it out. I don't spend, that's it. That's enough. And then she tells me, oh my God, I was crying when you were doing that. That's enough. I let it sit there, because then you keep performing it, and it keeps, because I was, as you know, I was interested in emotion. So when I realized that I could produce that both in myself and in the audience, done deal, But it's really, but there are certain dancers who would say, sorry, this is bullshit. I'm not interested. What are you talking about, Because they're not interested in that formulation. They're not interested in that exploration. They're not interested in those questions. So there would be no conversation for us to have in the studio. Like many classical dancers would be like, not so much, So that's what I mean. These people that I work with, somehow or another, we all are interested in this exploration, and it's quite how to say, it's I was a bit of a rebel. I was really into going into what was taboo. It was really, and I guess maybe science is like this too. Like, are you interested in the things that, like, the brain is we don't know a lot, so that's why you're interested in. Like, I was interested in, like, nobody was emoting on stage.
Well, but then it's kind of interesting that obviously kind of, then at some point, or many people are touched by it, right? Or there is some sort of an, and even though you say some classical dancers would say, what is that, right? There has to be something underlying, either in the expression of the emotion, or in the combination of these multi-sensory things like music and visual and movement, which is obviously kind of then really interesting to many people, or right, which is not that there's kind of only 1% who thinks, or it's interesting, but but so it seems to touch, or it does touch, then people through something which is potentially then very basic and will do something in our brains. I mean, in the end, it will go through our brain, even though if it's not, maybe understood what happens, and you say you don't care if people are touched by it or not the mechanisms, but there has to be then something basic, right, which does something to the brain, or to the person looking at it, and obviously also the people performing, which might be then shared among many others, or which is part of our built-in structure potentially, right?
But that, I wonder about that, because I start to think, because it was not the case in the beginning. You know what I mean? 2024. There's a kind of collaboration, and people, you come and people like my work. But when I was starting these experiments, no, people were really not supportive. I did not have support, and like I said, it was taboo, because yes, you would think that okay, because I emote on stage, you produce emotional meaning in the audience. No, it's not like that. It's not necessarily the case, because history, culture, politics, and the power of representation are larger than me. So I am also part of a chain of events, and it's a lot about timing. So there was the time, like, no one was doing it, yes. No, it was taboo. You couldn't do it. Dance was very conceptual. The idea of emoting at that point when I started doing it on stage was a no-no. Okay, so this is clear. So people are not necessarily, people are like squeamish. They're like, this is, it's not, I don't want to look at that. So what happens between then and now, right? Yeah. But there are things, people get tired of the other thing, right? People get tired of the other thing. It's not just that their brain, I don't know, it's not just that they become more receptive, it's that I'm sick of seeing that. People want something different too. I also think that politics and life changes, and so people, the zeitgeist, and then that's the best word I can describe it, this slowly starts to turn, and then people start to go, oh, okay, maybe I'll look a little bit at him. Okay. And then you come, and then a situation happens. You come someplace like Zurich, and people give you some money to produce your work. You have more resources. You meet someone like Daniel, who gives you the Kunsthalle Zurich, and you have a platform, and then it starts to work. But it's not. It's a multitude of things, I believe, and I guarantee you, it's switching now. I'm sure. I'm almost 100% positive that somewhere in the reaches, those kids are like, oh, I'm so sick of seeing him and that emotional bullshit. Good. I'm glad that it's gonna turn. Of course it has to turn. So I don't, I think history, I guess what I'm saying is I think history and culture and politics plays a huge part, and timing, and so I think anything is possible, and I know what you mean, like it is filtered through the brain, but I feel like the filter, the thing between you and me is it's not pure. Yeah. If it were pure, this would be amazing. Because, but there's so much history and politics and culture and economics and war and stuff in between us that it's that thing that we have to wade through that makes the artistic connection, I think, and makes it timely and meaningful.
Yeah. Well, I kind of totally agree, but I think at the same time there are, so to say, really these innate or very, simple and very old kind of receptions of rhythm, of movement, of kind of music, right? Yeah. Or everything together, which can be then in its pieces, obviously very different and very novel and have other levels, but who will still, and I think kind of, and I totally agree that there's lots of kind of political and kind of economical and all these things, but we are also kind of pretty old animals, so to say, yeah. and we do respond, and even though we think we are like all super special, very individual, all kind of a construct of all our experiences, in the end we're quite similar, right? Yeah. And also respond in similar ways, and those are changing how we respond to it, kind of especially in the cultural context, but there is also kind of, there's rhythms which go into us, yeah. Right, and looking at things which are also shared, and I think kind of the art is kind of to bring this together, even if it's a completely novel and disruptive way, which people kind of were not interested in, as you said, when you did your work. I still sometimes feels the same with my work, where people are still not interested in. No, but I think it's kind of, it's not, obviously it does hit many people looking at the pieces you do or you develop together with a team. Which doesn't prove that we are all the same. It's all kind of a simple model of kind of exciting our senses or our brain. But I think I still think it's interesting kind of that there is some sort of an underlying rhythm or underlying thing to it, which makes it interesting to many people. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was I mean, you hit on something, this question for me, because in thinking about, you know, the use, like, what can I do now? You know, like, what I think about your work, you can, it's really useful. Like, you can point towards how, I mean, yeah, no, I think so. I often feel this, you know, I feel like, okay, it's not that I don't think art is not useful, I do, but I understand its limits, you know, that if you need heart surgery, I can't do anything for you. Yes, I can, you know, I do believe that I work on the heart, but it's not the same thing as if you need a heart bypass, you know. And I've been thinking a lot about this next period of my work, and I want to, because I in my head I have to admit I think it's the last. Okay, maybe it's not, but I'm considering it as the last period, and I want it to be productive. And I want to do something that is more quantifiable in a certain type of way. Let's say, and I was thinking like about how I was like. What would be the opposite of fear? Like, you know, like, because I'm always thinking like, what's like fear? Like, people know fear. Like what do people, what in my life am I trying to get rid of? What am I thinking about? And I was thinking like how to get rid of fear, which is something which is in the brain, and it's not really, I mean, I know there's fear, like, okay, not to walk in the road, middle of the road when there's a car coming. But I'm talking about more, abstract fears that we have, you know. And I was thinking about how could dance as an art get into somehow to help people get rid of their fears. And I was thinking about like superheroes don't have fears, you know, like maybe like the opposite of that would be to be a superhero, to you know, just I go for it no matter what. I'm not afraid of things. I have this superhero or superheroine. And so I guess that's my question for you. Like I'm interested in like how can we dismantle fear in the brain? Because it's something I've really been thinking about. Like, is it something we can turn off?
Well, I think one thing, fear is just a very, very strong survival aspect, right? Being feared is in nature and is an important way of how to survive. You know, if you're unfeared, you will die pretty quickly, and maybe not in 2024 in Zurich, but you know, that's why fear. So some fear memories or traces, and we call them like engram. That's basically how you encode fear. So their single exposure is enough, and you will never get rid of that fear. So that's kind of that's like some sort of like in fear conditioning, right? If I would now get a foot shock, sitting here, I would be extremely scared to go on that stage again to get a shock, and those fears and there's an evolutionary advantage of being scared of feared situation. I think kind of now the problem is that many things, or that we kind of, our brains and our thinking might evolve faster than evolution, so that many, so to say, many fears are built into the system, but they're neither productive nor helpful nor protective. But it is a very, very strong, and it is so strong because it has so many advantages to be feared. And to be feared of predators, and you know, there's the kind of one example. If you know, mice, which are really often used in research, so they live for really 100 or 150 years within a laboratory environment. So there's no predators, there's no birds, there's no cats, but there's kind of, if they see a shadow of something which would look like a bird, and they've never, even their 10 to 50 generations before, have never seen a bird. If there's a shadow flying over them which looks like a bird, they're extremely scared. So it's this built-in fear, you know, which over thousands and hundreds of thousands of years was built in, and I think that's why kind of it is probably very hard to get rid of that, because it's such a strong, and it has reason. It has reason of surviving. But you know, I think there is ways how you can try to override it, right? Or how you can try to put it into more productive, you know, kind of behavioral outputs of fear or so, right? And I think kind of that's really a key thing that people thought, and really, I guess you can go to the moon and halfway back, and you have hundreds of billions of neurons in the brain. The classic idea was our brain is kind of, you know, you're born, and then you obviously learn how to walk and talk, and it changes structure. But then it's rather rigid, right? Like different than the muscles. If you go to the gym, they will grow, or if you stop doing it, they will kind of go down. And I think kind of what is so to say relatively novel conceptually, that our brain is also extremely plastic. So it's really not, you know, there's certain things which are very robust, like fear, but nothing is, so to say, written in stone. You know, there's certain, you know, there's an architecture, and our architecture in the brain is highly similar, but you can always change it, right? And there's always space for not only changing the function, but also it will change how it looks, right? So if you would train somebody to channel certain fears into something more productive, you could even see that in the brain. It will structurally change how neurons speak to each other, right? So which is kind of some sort of an optimistic note that there is space for change, right? And within one own's brain, ideally, but also kind of, you know, to access brains of people looking, let's say, at art or something else, kind of that can also affect how their brain will wire and how it will work afterwards, right? So I think it's hard work, but I think it's kind of doable, I would say.
But it seems to underline, to support the idea that the shock of the new actually has a power. That when you see something in art, you know, that blows your mind, I'm just using this phrase, blows your mind, or gives you another kind of aesthetic vista on life, and you go, wow, you see this spot, that actually could, I mean, that's why I keep doing it, because I believe that it could have an amazing impact, and that's the work that we could do. But it seems that what you're saying is that this is actually in the brain, like this thing that happens, this impact happens in your brain, and then you open, something opens up in the space of the brain.
Well, and I think it's really kind of, you know, you can, you know, these single events, which can then have, and again, for the next 20, 40, 60 years, can change how you perceive, how you sense kind of then things afterwards, right? There's really these, you know, as I said, kind of these disruptive moments, or this moment of novelty, or it can be also something you have seen 10 times, but the 11th time it's doing something to you, right? Yeah, and I think and that is not only functional, but also even really structural changes within the brain, right? That are hard to measure in humans, but there's so much kind of, you know, our brain is actually also made to detect those things and to respond to it. And one example is to make a completely new neuron, right? And for example, people thought, and maybe it's right, that, you know, that those new neurons may sort or bring together unrelated memories, where you say kind of, you know, on that day when you went in the evening to the theater, and you saw that thing, and then all of a sudden you would remember what you had for lunch. It's completely disconnected, but they're brought together and will make then this trace of memory kind of in one stable connection, so to say, right? But I think I think there's hope to change the brains by disruptive experiences and things, yeah. So. Yeah.
And what happens? I guess the second question is: so, does it happen on the level that there is a? Do you work on the level of thinking that shifts in multiple brains? Like, because now we're talking about a brain in a single body, I guess. But how do you research in terms of thinking about multiple brains that are operating in, you know, society?
As an ensemble, or kind of as a group, or I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm wondering, like, you could take it to the level of, okay, a group is a dance group, or it could be a society, it could be a city. You know, like, let's work on the Zurich brain, you know, like what?
God, it's more the Zurich face, which is worked on. Okay. But, well, I think that's kind of, you know, many, I mean, as a society, as a city, I mean, I think in the end we are, so to say, individuals, but for example, then things like social interactions or also shared experiences, you know, they will have an effect, right? That really makes a huge difference. If you would, and there's, for example, people trying to understand, you know, what happens if you watch something in a movie, or when you watch something on a stage, and that is really a different thing. And one aspect is probably not, I mean, in cinema you could also say there's 400 people looking at the same movie, but that is kind of some sort of, you know, shared social experience, which also kind of then has an impact, because it is a different type of experience you make then how the real experience, kind of what you see, what you feel, is integrated into the brain circuit. So I think kind of this idea of having kind of collective experience, or kind of that it is together in some sort of a more social context, that plays a tremendous role. It's not easy to study, and it's lots of hand waving, but it does make a role, and that is again not something which is unique only to the human brain, but which basically many other animals also experience as social entities then within groups. Yeah.
I could continue to listen to you for hours. Thank you very much. I thought we put two mice together on the stage. It's actually two brilliant brains. This has been mind expanding. Thank you very much. I would say, okay, extremely short questions, a question, not a comment. Can you ask questions, please?
It's really hard because it's so fascinating. Okay, I'll start with a keyword. Trevor said, space between us is not pure. And Sebastian mentioned this underneath of rhythm. And you work on heart, you work on brain. So it's so towards our well-being. I seem to feel there's a way that pure space sorry, Daniel, is these layers, condition, programming, generation, ratios, and history, religion, that makes this difficult. And to me, it seems like you asked very good question and the fear, and I don't think we can kill the fear. It's how to transform the fear to the love. This same energy, you can transform fear to the love. So my question to you two is, when you work, if you work towards the same goal, maybe you can collaborate to that underneath rhythm, that purification, which doesn't swim from left to right and work momentary, but later it swim back to the other side. I have no question.
Thank you very much. Do you want to comment something, or?
I'm not sure the question is, but yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, I know what I mean. Sure, there are certain. I haven't worked on this a lot, but I know that you can work on rhythm in a way that you can put people in a different state, in a different state of time, in a different way of perceiving space and time, and so that opens up, I think, ritualistically, a different kind of theater space. I'll just say that. I don't know then. I mean, there have been different choreographers who've just work on, let's say, rhythm. Their work is all about rhythm. But nothing is ever only about rhythm, because I'm not sure what the question is.
Let's do one more question, because we have to wrap up. Yeah, is one question? Okay.
Last night I was at a concert of Coldplay with 65,000 people, and the singer talked a lot about how being there, 65,000 people together under circumstances that unite them, hoping he would change their brains and love each other. And I mean, obviously it sounds naive, but I was hoping / wondering whether it's possible, or just hope, or just a step, and I think it fits into that conversation. So I'd like you to maybe say if anything like this is possible.
Well, I'm not sure if it's with Coldplay possible in a good way. No, I'm kidding. Well, you know, those are kind of, you know, these mass experiences. Kind of that's you know, that's some sort of psychological, often really not so great moments. But it could be that also this social experience of sharing 65,000 people listening at okay music, that this kind of you wonder, well, I'm not the only one who likes Coldplay. That's maybe the way where then people get really happy that they realize there's others who like Coldplay too. But there can be I think it's not so easy to study, because the way you would want to do that is looking at the brains by people to experience that, and you can't put 65,000 people in a brain scanner altogether. But I'm sure it gives some sort of a collective feeling, and it will affect the brain. I'm very sure about that. Yeah, it's very lukewarm answer. I'm sorry for that.
Yeah, and I would say that, when you said that, I was immediately afraid. Like, I was like, 65,000 people? That sounds very frightening to me. I would not want to be in a place with 65,000 people. But I think that's, for me, what I wish I could somehow reverse. That somehow that someone like myself wouldn't feel that the first place to go to is, I'm afraid to be around 65,000 people. Why is it that thought even exists for me? Shouldn't I feel that it's exciting to be amongst people and to be amongst other humans in a gathering? So I'm with you in that it's worth thinking about and challenging ourselves as a species.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Trajal. Thank you, Sebastian. This is outstanding. Thank you very much.